I don't want to come between you and the food. So when you get your food, come sit down and join us. And I would like to continue on and explore this morning a very interesting topic within Tevilat Keilim, which is what do I do with electric utensils? In other words, clear. I have a glass mug. Clearly, I have to toggle that. I have a metal coffee cup. I clearly have to toggle that. I have oven racks that come into contact with food. My oven racks need to be toggled. But what about I have a mixer, right? I have a mixer. Right, a mixer. Let's put mixer on the side for a moment, because by a mixer, the mixer body itself doesn't come into contact with food. Only the blades of the mixer come into contact with food. Okay, so that's not really. But let's say an urn, my Shabbos urn, right? My Shabbos urn I use every week. I might use it during the week as well. It's filled with water. The water comes into direct contact with the urn. I'm using it as a kli. So do I tovel my Shabbos urn or my toaster? What about, do I tovel my toaster? Do I tovel my sandwich maker? Do I tovel my George Foreman grill? Right? All of these items are used. Everybody, if you could just mute yourself. If you could just mute yourself on Zoom and unmute for a question, it would make it a little bit easier here. Okay, so the question is, what do I do with these things? They fit all the requirements of Tevilat Keilim. They're Keilim. They're used with food. They're Kli Seuda, probably no different than a pot or a pan would require Tevilah. So too, a coffee maker, an urn, a sandwich maker, something like that would require Tevilah. So what do I do with these items? So there are 4 different approaches to how I deal with the issue of the requirement of Tevilat Keilim on the one hand, and on the other hand, the possibility that I'm going to damage or destroy the kli on the other hand. Right? In other words, putting a toaster in water is probably not a good idea. Well, certainly not a good idea if it's plugged in, right? But even if it's not plugged in, it's not a good idea. Not a good idea for the toaster in the long run. Perhaps we'll see. So, how do I deal with this kind of technology? So the first approach, it's very interesting when you go back and you look at, where these approaches come from and who are the personalities that wrote about these approaches. So the first approach actually comes from a Rav by the name of Mordechai Yaakov Breish. I don't know if any of you have heard of him. His sefer, the Sfarim, the Halacha Sfarim that he wrote are called Chelkas Yaakov. Mordechai Yaakov Breish, Chelkas Yaakov. He actually was born in the Ukraine before the war, and he survived the war because right before the war, he accepted a position as a rabbi in Switzerland, as head of the community in Switzerland. He was a Belzer Chassid. He was born into the Belzer Hasidim. He's a Belzer Chassid. He accepted this position in Switzerland, and he survived along with a community in Switzerland during the time of the war. So Rav Mordechai Yaakov Breish wrote in his Sefer Chelkas Yaakov a lot about technology. One of the first really tshuva sefers that deal with what were emerging technologies in his day, like the timer. Right? For us today, the timer is old technology, but a light timer in those days was a big deal. Rav Moshe also dealt with these kinds of technologies. But it's fascinating here. You have a Belzer Chassid who was born in the Ukraine and lived in France and then in Switzerland, and he's writing about these technologies. So what does he say? So Rav Mordechai Yaakov Breish says that any electric appliance is exempt from the mitzvah of Tevilah, meaning it does not need to be toveled. Why? Why not?
You're gonna ruin it. Yeah.
Okay, so Steve is suggesting that you're going to ruin it, which we have to look at. I mean, how does that impact? That's not what Rav Mordechai Yaakov Breish's reason was, right? We're going to actually come to that reason next. But Rav Mordechai Yaakov Breish's reason is a fascinating analysis.
Well, in addition, some people who may not wait long enough for it to dry can suffer injury and destruction if they plug it in.
Okay, good. Let's focus on what Rav Breish says, and it's a fascinating understanding of something that goes beyond Tevilat Keilim as well. Rav Mordechai Yaakov Breish says that if you plug something into the wall, it is now considered as part of the wall, right? Every electrical appliance is in the wall, right? The outlet is in the wall. You plug something into the wall, it is now considered as if it's connected to the wall. The wall is connected to the ground, and therefore the kli is considered as if it is connected to the ground. What's that song? The hip bone is connected to the, whatever that song was or still is, I don't know. But that's the svara that he uses. He says if it's connected, in order for it to work, it has to be connected, has to be plugged in.
How about a battery operated?
Well, hold on a second. When it's plugged in, so what happens? When it's plugged in, so now it becomes part of the wall, part of the house. The house is connected to the ground, part of the ground. Okay, whether you like that idea or not, whether you follow that logic or don't follow that logic.
Well, it's whether you're saying it's not a kli by itself.
Oh, that's exactly what he says. He says, because of the fact that it's now connected to the ground, it's not directly connected to the ground, but because of the fact that the only way it can work is when it's connected to the plug, which is connected to the house, which is connected to the ground, and therefore makes the kli part of the ground, it is no longer metaltalin. What does metaltalin mean? Movable. Something which is movable. When Bnei Yisrael attacked and defeated Midian, they brought back Keilim. By definition, those utensils that they brought back had to be movable. If they were not movable because they were attached to the ground, so then they don't require Tevilah. The whole institution of Tevilah was directed at the Keilim that Bnei Israel brought back from Midian. Anything that fits into that paradigm, that's what needs Tevilah. If it doesn't fit into that paradigm, it doesn't need Tevilah. So if a kli is attached to the house, or are attached to the ground, the only way it works is when it's attached to the house, which is attached to the ground. It's considered not as metaltalin, and therefore it does not require Tevilah.
You would hold the battery power.
So that's what Richard just asked. What about something which is battery powered? My wife just got a battery powered zhuzher, right? I don't. Zhuzher. I now, okay. So it's called an immersion blender. It's called an immersion blender. So let's say you make vegetable soup, and the vegetable soup has carrots and celery and onions and potatoes and all this other stuff, and you want to blend it so that it has a thicker now. You want to blend it. You want to puree it. You want to blend it. So one possibility is you take the hot soup, pour it into your blender, and blend it. But nobody does that. What do they use? They use something called an immersion blender. Right? An immersion blender goes into the pot, has a little blade at the bottom, and when you turn it on, that blade does essentially the same thing that your blender does, except rather than putting your food in the blender, you're putting the blender in the food. Okay, it's called an immersion blender. For some reason, everybody I know calls it a zhuzher. I don't know why. I have no idea why. Because it makes that sound. When you turn it on, it makes that sound. So I guess from there they call it a zhuzher. I don't know. It's called a zhuzher.
Onomatopoeia.
Whatever it is. Okay, an onomatopoeia. It's called right. It's called a zhuzher. What?
The blades, I don't know if you call them blades, they actually attach.
No, the blade of that doesn't attach. No, the blade of that doesn't attach, right? It's called. So my wife just got one which is battery operated. So battery operated. So now you have a whole, So now so the truth is, in general, the part of the blade does come off from the electric part, so you can just toggle that part of the blade because that's the only part that comes into contact with food. Okay, but the idea of a battery-operated something might come into play. Anyway, so let's think for a moment about this idea of Mordechai Yaakov Breish. This idea that something which is plugged in is considered as it's connected to the ground. When you plug something in, so what happens? What happens when you plug something in?
Connecting to an electrical source.
You're right. There's electricity running through your house, and the electricity stops at your outlet. Right? I mean, it might continue on to other outlets, but it stops at this outlet. And when you stick something into that outlet, hopefully a plug, hopefully nothing that your grandchildren put in there. When you stick something into that outlet, what does it do? It completes the circuit which is broken by the outlet. And when it completes the circuit, so now the electricity is now running from that outlet. It's coming from your electrical panel, which is attached to the electricity that's coming into your house from the street, which comes from the power station, wherever it is. And now that electricity is running through your appliance and doing, when you turn the on switch, whatever that appliance is supposed to do, or whatever that appliance is supposed to do. So this is an interesting Shabbos issue.
Yes.
Right? It's an interesting Shabbos issue because if something is plugged in, what is its status on Shabbos? So clearly, if something is plugged in and it's working, on Shabbos, so for instance, I have a light, my light is plugged in, can I unplug my light?
No.
I'm sorry, my light is plugged in and it's on. Can I unplug my light? No, why not? Because I am breaking the circuit. Exactly what malacha, electricity, is all about is a whole discussion. Maybe one day we'll get into it, right? Probably while I'm doing Tevilat Keilim. It's a whole discussion, right? And, some say that electricity is eish. It's under the category of fire. Others say that electricity is boneh. It's completing a circuit. These all have very interesting practical ramifications. So for instance, there's no fire. If I touch these these are actually LED lights, right? The good old incandescent light bulbs. Remember those? Right? The good old incandescent light bulbs. If you touch one of those light bulbs, it's hot, right? It's hot, right? There's actually an element inside called a filament, and the filament heats up the gas which is in that bulb, right? And glows, and that's what provides the light, and that's what makes the bulb hot. On a bulb like that, interestingly, you can make a bracha, right? On a bulb like that, you can make a bracha. So for instance, in the olden days, when you were in the hospital and they had incandescent lights, so one of the things that you could do, one of the ways you could say a bracha on Ner of Shabbos, right? Because nobody's allowing you to light candles on, in the hospital on Shabbos. So one of the ways in which you could do it was to make the bracha and then to flip the switch on the electric light in your room, and that would ignite the incandescent filament, and you have fulfilled your Shabbos obligation that way. It's much more complicated today because no hospital uses incandescent lighting anymore. It's not, a lot of people don't use incandescent lighting anymore. It's not, what word am I looking for?
Energy efficient.
In vogue.
It's not energy efficient. It's not in vogue. It's not energy efficient. It's
Hopefully the Jewish chaplain has the right thing that he wants to
so then you have a couple, so then we get into some complicated questions, all right? You tell the chaplain, you tell the Jewish chaplain that you want to light something for Shabbos. So what do? They come and they bring a plug-in menorah, like a plug-in Shabbos light, plug-in candlesticks, right? Plug-in candlesticks. Can I use plug-in candlesticks for my Shabbos licht? If it's a filament, I could use plug-in candlesticks for my electric light. The problem is most of these electric candles are not incandescent, right? They're not incandescent. They're a much less voltage, obviously, so it becomes very problematic. So sometimes they bring in these little battery, I don't know if you've seen them, these little battery-operated lights that flicker, right?
I'm heading down the road of a lot of trouble.
What'd you say?
I'm heading down the road of a lot of trouble.
I know, right? So we're not even down the road yet. So, right, so what do you do if you're in the hospital? What do you do if you're in the hospital over Shabbos?
You like before.
So you have your wife light for you. You have your wife light for you. She lights for you every other week. You have your wife light for you. What do you do if your wife's in the hospital? So you light Shabbos candles at home, right? You light the Shabbos candles at home, right?
That electric appliance on Shabbos that's plugged in.
Oh, hold on. I want to go down the rabbit hole one more stop, and that is an electric menorah. Right? We just finished Hanukkah.
It's never okay.
Right? Electric menorah. Can I use an electric menorah to fulfill my obligation of lighting Hanukkah candles?
No.
No.
It's
The
never
obligation
been
is
accepted.
Persumei Nisa, you're doing Persumei Nisa with those candles. But if the obligation is to light the candle, you're not.
Okay. So in general, we say that one should not fulfill his or her obligation of lighting the menorah through an electric menorah.
Should not or
But
could not?
should not. What's the reason for that? Why not?
All finishes. The electricity is constantly
Because
flowing.
you say, well, hot lick theirs.
So you say, all right, so lahadlik ner would have to be an incandescent bulb, let's
Say
say.
the same thing on top.
Right, it's the same thing on Shabbos, lahadlik ner shel Shabbos. So let's say it's an incandescent bulb, and I can use an incandescent bulb. Most electric menorahs are not incandescent bulbs. The bulbs don't get hot, right? So theoretically, let's say I had incandescent bulbs. Could I do it? So the problem is a problem not of the lahadlik, which would be solved by the incandescent bulb. The problem is a problem of the fuel source. When you light your menorah, you have to make sure that you have long enough candles or enough oil in the menorah in order for that menorah to burn for half an hour, 30 minutes, after Seisa Kochavim, after the stars come out, right? That is your obligation. If you light a menorah and you don't have that much fuel there, or let's say you want to cut your candles in half, right? You got to go out in 10 minutes, right? So you're going to cut your candles down so that they only burn for 10 minutes. You haven't fulfilled the mitzvah, right? They have to be able to burn for at least 30 minutes after Seisa Kochavim, which is problematic when you use regular Hanukkah candles on Friday afternoon, because you have to light before you light Shabbos candles. You light Shabbos candles 18 minutes before sunset. So now the assuming that you light Hanukkah candles 19 minutes before sunset, 1 minute before you light Shabbos candles, so they have to last 19 minutes until sunset, right? And then they have to last another period of time until Seisa Kochavim, and then they have to last for half an hour after that. So you have to use long, that's why they make those longer candles. The problem is if it's like night 7, right? If Friday night is light 7 and you have all those candles, the heat from all those candles makes them melt faster. So the best thing to do is to put them in your freezer, right? So that when you light, right? When you light, I don't know, right? Because when they light, they last longer. Put them in the freezer. You put them in the freezer because the candle takes longer to melt if it's frozen.
Can you use an electric lighter, can't you?
What
about when you cruise
all right,
in?
so now we say,
Hotel?
all right, so now we say, so here's the problem with the electric menorah. Assuming I can use an incandescent bulb and I can get away with the lahadlik part being fulfilled, I need to have this fuel source. What do I not have with anything that plugs in? I do not have an existing fuel source. Because at any moment, what can happen? At any moment, the power can go out, right? So I don't have a, let's call it a reservoir of fuel. So at any moment, the power could go out, right? And if the power goes out, what happens? I have no more fuel. A generator doesn't help because what could happen to a generator? Generator can also go out.
Yeah, but if you're using that, if this could happen, or since this could happen, so a candle can blow out.
So you have a great question, right? A candle can blow out. Let's say I light, or even if a candle, sometimes you light your Hanukkah candles and then the flame is like, I'm not sure, maybe I want to burn, maybe I don't want to burn, I'm not sure, and decides 5 minutes later, I don't want to burn. Right? You have to relight that candle. No. So the answer is no. As long as when you lit it, all of the conditions were in place. No, but because when I lit this electric menorah, there was no reservoir of fuel. It's
your electric system.
No, but it's not a reservoir. That's not a reservoir. It's a constant stream which is coming. It's a at anywhere down the road, right? It's not sitting there. It's not like you're sitting there, right? It's continually flowing. So that's the reason why we don't use electric menorahs. Okay, good. What about if you have no choice? What about if you're on an airplane? Right? You're on an airplane. You have no choice. You're on an airplane. You're on a cruise ship. They don't let you light
hotel.
Right? Not a good idea to light candles in a cruise ship, right? Although do they let you?
In a cabin, you don't do it in your cabin. Can't do it in your
Can't in a hotel either.
In a hotel, I don't know. You can do it. Can you do it in the bathroom? I don't know. Maybe you can do it. I don't know. Whatever. Okay. So what do? So here's a fascinating approach, and that is you use a flashlight. You use a flashlight. Why do I use a flashlight? Because what is a battery? A battery is a reservoir of fuel. So I use a battery. So I can use, remember, the obligation of Hanukkah candles, it's only one candle, right? That's the basic obligation, is one candle per night. Right? In other words, one candle the first night, one candle the second night. We do it in a mahadran way, but I'm sure you learned about it. But that's the obligation. So if you're in a place, let's say you're on a cruise, you take a flashlight, you make the bracha, turn the flashlight on, and after half an hour, you can turn the flashlight off.
Also for Shabbos?
No, it doesn't. I don't think a flashlight works for Shabbos because you need the lahadlik. I'm not sure that that's there when it comes to.
You can make a bracha. You can make a bracha.
Yeah. What?
You can make a bracha.
Yeah, you can make a bracha. That's what they say. You make a bracha with that.
This is an ordinary day if you're on the ship. You turn the flashlight on and then you can turn it off after half an hour.
Right, except for Shabbos. Shabbos, you just have to wait till the flashlight dies.
Most of the flashlights these days are using what chemicals?
They're not incandescent. Yeah, so that could be an issue. Raz, go ahead.
A Shabbos light, when I was in the hospital and rehab, unfortunately too many times, I had something which I charged up. It was not, I didn't have to use it plugged in.
Like a battery,
Already charged.
like a battery kind of thing.
And it lasted the whole shop.
Right. So again, the requirement of light of lighting candles on Shabbos or before Shabbos is different than the requirement of lighting Hanukkah candles. When I light candles on Shabbos, I do not need to have a reservoir of fuel. I just have to do the lighting. And if the power were to go out, if I used my incandescent bulbs and the power went out right away, not a problem. But on Shabbos, the issue is the lighting, not the reservoir. On Hanukkah, there's that issue of the reservoir of fuel, which is there. Bob, yeah.
If you're, let's just say, in a hotel on Shabbos, the end of Shabbos, you don't have a candle. You make hooray on the lamp.
If it's an incandescent bulb, yes. If it is an LED bulb or a fluorescent bulb, no.
But that's my question. What do you do in the cruise ship and what do you do in the hotel?
You bring candles with you.
It's I know that there are from cruises, so I'm sure they've figured out what to do.
The electric menorah has more practical considerations on it. What I understand is that if you, for example, you're going to light your menorah, your regular menorah, and if before you light your menorah, you decide I'm going to just turn on my electric menorah, just to have it on, as a decoration, etc., that you might be being yotzeh with that mitzvah of adlakas neros with your electric menorah, that therefore you should not turn on the electric menorah first, light your candles, which then you can turn, because with the avid you might be.
So the electric menorah is a little bit of a double-edged sword, because on the one hand, as Steve mentioned earlier, there's certainly Pirsume Nisa, right? We have an electric menorah out here, out here in front of shul. Most shuls have an electric menorah in front of them, but it's, and there is an element of Pirsume Nisa there, but no one fulfills the mitzvah with that. No one fulfills the mitzvah with that. Chabad, on the other hand, when Chabad lights their big menorah in Manhattan, right? They're using real fuel. It's a real fuel source. It's real hadlaka. The whole thing doesn't blow up is mina shamayim, right? But it's a fuel. They're using it. They're actually lighting a fire there. Actually lighting a fire.
That's why I'm not to turn on the electric menorah until after.
Okay, good. The problem is if I drive by your house and I see an electric menorah in your window, I'm like,
Well,
Masaryk is he's a shagitz,
I have Santa Claus on the lawn, so.
Okay, all right. Right, so when you drive by a shul and you see an electric menorah outside of the shul, nobody's fulfilling their obligation with that electric menorah. If you go by a house and you see an electric menorah in the window, it's
You see a regular menorah and the electric.
Right, but you only see that for the amount of time that the regular. Okay, anyway, so here's the question. Here's another interesting question, and I actually had this question, and I actually blew it because I didn't know physics. Right, I had this question, I blew it, I didn't know physics, and I learned it subsequently. So I want to share it with you. My wife left the charger for her iPhone in an outlet in the kitchen. When I say the charger for the iPhone, I don't mean the cord. I mean the thing that plugs into the outlet that the USB cord plugs into, right? And it was in the way.
About Shabbos?
It was in the way.
On Shabbos, you mean?
It was Shabbos, yes, it's Shabbos, right? It was in the way. Because it was like on the counter, right? It was in the way. Whatever it was, it was in the way of whatever needed to be done, right? So she said to me, "Can I unplug it?" So I looked at it. No lights, right? No indicator light. Some of these things have an indicator light. No indicator light. It wasn't plugged in. There was no cord plugged into it that was plugged into any appliance or anything. So I said, "Yeah." Right? So she said, "Okay, do it." Right? So I pulled it out of the outlet and put it and then I put it somewhere else. Okay, good.
Phone attached to it?
What?
Was it phone attached to it?
Nothing was attached to it. I'm like, here I'm right. I'm thinking, I'm a chacham, right? Nothing's attached to it. I pull it out, right? Right? I'm not really doing anything. Right? I'm not really doing anything.
What if it was something?
Wait a second, hold on. Not really doing anything. I subsequently learned.
A guy saw it in the New York
I
Times.
subsequently learned that you shouldn't do that. Why not?
There's always electricity going in this.
Because you shortened the circuit.
Because I shortened the circuit.
ended
Cut
at
the circuit.
Outlet, and now it ended at the plug, and you made the circuit shorter.
So what?
I don't know. So let's say what's going on inside? What's going on?
Right? So Alan is right? Because when you dig into the details a little bit more, you learn that a plug is not a plug is a plug is a plug. That was only true when I was growing up. But today, plugs are different. So what is this brick that you plug into the wall? What is it doing? It's taking the alternating current, right, which is coming out of your outlet. Your outlet produces something called alternating current. If you want to know more about that, ask Leslie. It's alternating current. And what is it doing? It's transforming that current into direct current. Why is it transforming it into direct current? Because you can only charge a battery through direct current. And when you plug your phone in, what's the whole purpose of plugging your phone in? To charge your phone battery. So in order to charge your phone battery, you have to have direct current. So there's alternating current, which is coming out of your outlet. So that little brick thing, they call it a brick, that you plug in, that little brick thing, what does it do? It transforms the alternating current into direct current. And it also modulates the voltage which is coming out. It's what one of those brick things does. And if you have your computer plugged in, you'll generally see in your power cord, right? You plug it into the wall. The cord plugs into this big brick. And then from the brick, there's a cord that goes into your computer. Because it's generally, if it's a laptop, it's generally doing the same thing, which namely is charging the battery.
But if it's not giving off any heat, is it still in violation of Shabbat?
So it's not giving off any heat, but it's still working. In other words, the current is something is still happening inside of that brick. The current which is coming out is being transformed inside of that brick. And as long as that brick is plugged in, so I can't unplug it.
You know, one of the answers to that question came from the electric company. When they gave you something to save money, they tell you to pull it out. The reason is, as long as it's in, you're still being charged.
Interesting. Okay.
So they gave you the answer.
Okay, so very good. So now, so I messed up, right? So I messed up by pulling out that cable, right?
You can just pull the wire.
There's no wire.
The wire that attached to the
right. You could pull the wire out if you did it in an indirect fashion, because the wire itself is not doing anything, right? But that brick, which is a transformer that's plugged in, so that's problematic,
But
right?
of course, it's a grandma and it's the lonely LA, so I don't think I don't think you have to bring a carbon copy.
Okay, all right. So now one further application, Bob. Hang on a second. One further application. Let's say I have a light. My light is plugged in. My light's plugged in.
Shabbos.
Right, Shabbos. Right, my lamp. The lamp on my
Table.
Floor.
lamp in my living room is plugged in, right? And the light's off. And I'm worried someone's going to trip over the cord. The light is off. Can I pull that cord out of the wall?
You can move the lamp away.
No,
Move it over toward the wall.
I could do that. I could move the lamp over to the wall.
because nothing's the same.
Yes, you
But
can.
I could
Yes, you can.
I could pull the cord out of the wall if I do it with a shinui. If I do it not in its usual way, but I do it, I kick it out with my foot or something like that. I can do that because there's nothing happening within the cord. I mean, it's true, the electricity is going, but the circuit is broken at the light because the light's not turned on. So under those circumstances, if I do a kila achar yad with a shinui, with a change, I don't pull it out its normal way, so then I would be allowed to do it, but not the transformer. Bob, go ahead, you had a question.
And this question is relative to what you just said. Going back to your iPhone plug. And this is true with many plugs, if you leave it in for some extended period of time, it gets very hot. So could you argue that I'm pulling it out for pikuach nefesh to prevent the fire? And you could use the same logic for your thing. Your grandchild could trip over the thing.
Okay, so we have to be careful when we talk about pikuach nefesh. Pikuach nefesh means someone's going to die, right?
Well, if your house catches fire,
well, right. So the question is, in all likelihood, that transformer will get a little bit warm, but it's not going to get hot enough to ignite something, right? It could be, listen, you could have a fire in any electric appliance that could go on the fritz. But generally that transformer is not going to get hot enough to ignite something. It might get a little bit warm. Leslie pointed out before it gets warm. Part of the reason it gets warm is because it's still working. There's still something going on inside of it, which is part of the reason why it gets warm. A normal light, a normal cord, a lamp cord, which is plugged in, doesn't get warm, right? The lamp cord.
These chargers will.
The chargers will get hot. So could you do it for pikuach nefesh if you really thought that there was a danger of fire? So then, figure you could ask a non-Jew to take it out or something like that. If you really thought there was if it was actually on fire, pull it out,
What's the reason you have to take the plug out on a different way than you normally do? What's the reason for that?
Because whenever you're doing something, even if it's something which is, because you are clearly, right, what you're clearly doing is you are clearly, the power is coming in up to the light. So you're severing that power to the light. So when you're severing the power to the light to avoid all kinds of questions, you do it kil achar yad with a shinui, with a change that lowers the level. So for instance, let's say there are things that we do on Shabbos under certain circumstances where I can use a shinui. I can use a change to modify, to lower the level of violation, right?
Isn't it also that it's
a
different thing that you would do than during the week? What you do on Shabbos, you want to show that it's different than what you do during the week.
Yeah, that's another.
It is a violation, but you're allowed to do it in a different way, so it's not such a big violation.
So to pull, I don't want to use that terminology because that's a slippery slope. Yes. To pull, right? How big of a violation is it? Right? To pull a plug out of the wall is severing the electrical connection between the outlet and the plug. And the lamp.
Right.
So it is doing something. What exactly is that malacha? That's a subject of dispute among the poskim. There's no light on, so it's not fire, right? So it could be something else, and probably on a rabbinic level. So when you use a shinui, you lower it. You lower it to a different level. It's like I think I mentioned to you about tearing the toilet paper last week. You do it with a shinui, right? Because lowers the level.
So what about my lamp that's on Shabbos? Can I move that for any reason?
So if your lamp is on, it has the status now of muktzah. And now muktzah can be moved under certain circumstances. Right? So if you need, let's say, the place, where the lamp is, so as long as you're not disconnecting it, you can move it, right? Because it's muktzah, but muktzah can be moved if you need the place. I had a question, we used to have a question in camp in the summer. You turn on your fan, you have a plug-in fan, and are you allowed to redirect the fan on Shabbos? The fan's blowing this way. Can I turn the fan around so that it blows towards me? And the answer is yes, I can do that. I can turn the fan around so that it blows towards me. I don't even need a shinui for that. Yes.
The plug is on a timer
Yeah.
connected to the receptacle. Now, at night comes on, goes off at 9 o'clock, and it starts again at 10 o'clock for the heat up. Can you, when it's off, go and pull the plug out of the timer? If I leave it, tomorrow it's
Yes,
gonna
with a
be-
shinui, I could do it.
Even if because it's delayed?
With a shinui, I can do it because there's nothing happening
No.
external to the timer. There is something happening now inside the timer. I can't disconnect the timer, right? But so I have two options. I could pull out whatever's plugged into the timer, or I can pull out the pin in the timer that will cause it to turn back on.
Shabbat?
Yes, even on Shabbat, I could pull out the pin in the timer. Okay, good. All right, so one approach to Tevilah, I'm sorry again, rabbit hole. One approach to Tevilah is it's considered connected to the ground. I don't have to tovel it. A second approach to this is the approach that Steve mentioned, which happens to be an approach attributed to Rav Moshe Feinstein, actually and Rabbi Asher Weiss as well. And that is, wait a second, the whole reason to do Tevilah is so that I can use this kli. In other words, I want to use this kli. I want to use this glass mug. But in order to use the glass mug, I have to tovel it, right? That's what Tevilah is all about. So Rav Asher Weiss writes, it doesn't make sense to say that in order to use this appliance, I need to tovel it, because if I tovel it, what's going to happen to the appliance? It's going to get destroyed, and then I can't use it. So as a result of that, it should be exempt from Tevilah. Rav Asher Weiss writes that. He says, although this seems to make sense, people generally don't rely on it. This is Rav Moshe's tshuva as well. And there are plenty of people who don't rely on this particular tshuva of Rav Moshe when it comes to the idea of it getting ruined. Why? Because there are people who say that as long as there is not a microchip in the electric appliance, you can tovel it and let it dry, and it will be fine. And you'll find this view that you don't have to tovel the plug, right? But you could tovel the appliance and just let the appliance dry, and it will be fine. So I was, this is true confessions I'm sharing with you today. We got a new urn, a new urn for Shabbos, right? Right? We got a new urn. The zhuzher I took care of, right?
Things with detachable plugs.
Things which are not detachable plugs.
Underneath is a whole wall oven.
Right? Even things which are not detachable plugs, right? So what's the idea behind this? So the idea behind this here is you immerse it and it'll dry out, and you let it dry for a week, and then you plug it in.
But sometimes I do what I do. I don't think everybody's up to do it. I turn it upside down. To the bottom is a plate. That behind the plate there are electrical parts.
Right.
I open it up, and while I'm immersing, I immerse it enough to see just a little water come in. That's what makes me sure that
Anybody has an electrical appliance, take it to Iraj, right? So the reason that there are poskim who don't hold by Rav Moshe on this is because, and Lamaisa, it happens to be true, might not be something that we're comfortable doing, that lots of people are comfortable doing, but if you take your toaster and you immerse your toaster and you let it dry out, right? It'll work.
Just don't forget to unplug it.
Right. It'll work, right?
don't throw it in the bag.
Right, it'll work, right? A wall oven you don't have to worry about, because a wall oven is attached to the house, right? That's what makes it a wall oven. It's attached to the house. If you have a toaster oven,
if you're having it installed.
well, yeah, but when you're using it, it's attached to the house, right? A toaster oven, on the other hand, is not attached to the house, right? And if you don't want to rely on Rabbi Mordechai Yaakov Breish's opinion that when it's plugged in, it's considered attached to the house, you would have to tovel your toaster oven.
Isn't it only the the thing that sits on it, you Tevilat, you don't put the food in a toaster oven. You have the grate. You put it on a grate.
So it depends. You're right, it depends. You could put it on the grate. If the grate is removable, so then you just have to tovel the grate.
Underneath is a filament. Over the filament is a grate.
Yeah, so you just have to tovel the grate if that's it. But let's say you have a George Foreman grill, right? A George Foreman grill, you cook directly on the, on the sandwich maker. Correct? You cook directly on the sandwich maker. So you have the heter. You have the heter of Rav Mordechai Yaakov Breish that says you plug it in, you don't have to worry about it, it's not considered a kli. Rav Moshe's heter that says, it's going to get ruined. Rav Asher Weiss perhaps in that camp as well. There are two other possibilities that I want to discuss with you now. The other possibility is something that we hinted at last week, and that is, if you let's say that you buy an electric utensil and you dismantle that electric utensil and then reassemble it, it is now considered as if it was made by a Jew. In other words, you have destroyed the kli, and now in repairing the kli, it is as if a Jew has made the kli, and it no longer requires tevilah. Where did this discussion first arise? In the Sfarim of Rav Avraham Danzig, which we know probably better as the Chachmas Adam or the Chaye Adam. He wrote those halachas Sfarim, and he dealt with the question of big vats that they use to cook beer, right? I don't know, right? He was in Danzig, right? That's where he got his name from, right? Where's Danzig? Germany. I guess they were mevinim in beer, and it seems that there is certain beer. Part of the process of making beer is to cook it in these big vats. So his question was, what do I do with these? What do I do about Tevilat Keilim? So he said that they needed to make a hole in the vat to destroy the name kli from it, and then what? And then repair it. And when you repair it, so that's right. So now it's an interesting question. Is that something that the average person can do? Right? So Iraj sounds like Iraj can do it. Right? He can open up his
Jewish person can.
right?
Probably have to call it
Right? It's the old Jackie Mason. Steve, it's the old Jackie Mason joke. If you're driving along the road and you see a car stranded by the side of the road with the hood up, how do you know if if there are Jews driving it or non-Jews driving it? He says, if you see the people in the hood, right, trying to fix the car, you know it's non-Jews. If you see the people on a cell phone, you know it's Jews, right? So, so that's the right, Jewish stereotypes, I guess, if you will. So it depends on what destroys the kli. So I think if you could disconnect the electrical unit internally, then you can't use it anymore. That's clear. And if you then could reconnect that electric unit, so that would reestablish it as a kli, recreate it as a kli, and it would be created as now it would be a Jewish kli, and you would not have to do Tevilat Keilim on it. Okay. One final approach, which is a fascinating approach. This approach actually gained prominence during the worst of COVID, which hopefully is behind us. I'm not saying all of COVID is behind us, but hopefully the worst of COVID is behind us, when the Keilim mikvaos were closed. So the question was, I have a kli that needs to be toveled. What do I do with it? So if you remember, I mentioned last week, one of the pieces of advice was to put it out by the street and to say in front of 3 people, I've abandoned it, right? And then to reacquire it. So you're not acquiring it from a goy, you're reacquiring it from Hefker. Okay. So at the same time, there is a mechanism. If you transfer ownership of this kli to a goy, and the goy then allows you to use the kli, you can use it without Tevilat Keilim. Right? You can use it without Tevilat Keilim. So how is this accomplished? So I guess on a simple level, you could say to your housekeeper, Maria, I'm giving you this urn as a gift. It now belongs to you. Would you mind if I kept it in my kitchen? Would you mind if I used it? And if she says no problem, okay, so you're a Jewish person borrowing a kli that belongs to somebody who's not Jewish. As long as you're borrowing it and not acquiring it, so then it works. But the lawyers here are not so happy about that, right? The lawyers here want a document, right? Not so happy about just
It's a sham.
What?
It's a sham.
It's not a sham. It's a legal loophole. And if legal loopholes didn't exist, lawyers wouldn't exist.
Like when I put it out
right?
by the garbage, the only one who hears me say I'm making it is myself.
No, you have to have three people. In fact, the time of the advice at the time was that you should send a message out to your WhatsApp group saying, by the way, I'm abandoning this. Anybody wants it, come and take it. That you needed to communicate, and that's the difficult part.
The other way, that's dangerous. Someone come and take it.
Isn't the other way similar to when you're selling chametz? You're not borrowing.
So this is the loophole. This is the legal loophole which is built in.
You have to decide a contract for that.
So there's an institution. Have you heard of Somet? Somet institution in Israel. They do these the wheelchairs that scooters, right? The scooters that you can use on Shabbos, the gramophones which they used to do.
Shabbos loudspeaker.
Shabbos microphone. They do these kinds of things. So the Somet Institute actually has devised something. It's called E-Tevila. You could look it up online. E-Tevila, in which you can fill out a form and a contract, and every week they act as your agent and sell whatever you have listed on that form. They sell it to a non-Jew, and you borrow it back. You actually pay a little fee to join, and you borrow it back and are allowed to use it from that perspective. In perpetuity.
So let's say something is stolen on the street.
Not only that, forever.
So this is what? You do not have to be in Israel. You could be anywhere in the world. You could fill out this form anywhere in the world. Right? Richard's raising an interesting question. What happens if the kli gets destroyed? Do you have to now reimburse the non-Jew? And all of that's included in the contract.
And your insurance company,
what?
Is your insurance company now void of paying for it if it gets?
But some interesting, right? And it's an interesting approach. Right? It's an interesting approach. If you don't want to rely on the heter that says I don't have to do tevilah at all, and if you don't want to mess around with your electric utensil, and if you don't want to actually take the risk of putting it into the mikvah, so this mechanism, right, is a more official mechanism than simply giving a gift to your housekeeper. It's a more official mechanism. It has some legal backing to it. It's a document, it's a contract, it has some legal backing to it, and it allows you to avoid the issue. You're not toveling it because now it doesn't require tevilah. And it doesn't require tevilah because it is an electrical appliance that belongs to a non-Jew that you are borrowing. Now, obviously, we're not getting involved in any kashrus issues because it's not leaving your house. Right? It's staying in your house, so it's not an issue.
You have to admit this is problematic, obviously, because we don't rely on such a heter for, say, let's say, Shemitah. And when we agreed that, at least I think we recall, that we said that Tevilat Keilim is a deraisa, that is from the Torah. So we are using a.
Not everybody agrees that Tevilat Keilim is. Not everybody holds that Tevilat Keilim is a dioraisa.
So do we? I mean, it's a problematic issue to rely on such a blanket.
Listen, Somet is an institution that is dedicated to finding ways to deal with modern technological issues. So again, you don't have to rely on this. You could throw your toaster in the mikveh, right? Or you can rely on Rav Moshe. You could rely on Rav Mordechai Yaakov Breish, or you could disconnect it, the internal electric, and have it reconnected. You could bring it over to Iraj, right? You have options. But I'm just bringing this out as one of the options, an option that a lot of people are not aware of, as one of the interesting options to deal with electrical utensils and the obligation of Tevilat Keilim. What?
If I
Go look it up. Eat Tevilah. Yeah.
Rabbi?
Only on this end of the table.
If I use say option A.
Yes.
Okay. But you don't believe in option A.
Okay.
You come to my place.
Okay, so all right, so Les is raising an interesting question, and that is, Les relies on option A, which says, I don't have to tovel it, either I plug it in and it's connected to the ground, or it's going to get ruined. I rely on one of those heterim, and that's what I do. And now he invites somebody over to his house who doesn't rely on those heterim. Right, so what do? So we learned last week that if you're invited to someone's house, and let's say that person didn't do Tevilat Keilim, right? Are you allowed to eat there? And the answer is yes, you're allowed to eat there. Why? Because it's not your obligation. It is only the owner's obligation to be tovel the Keilim before use. It's not your obligation. You're just eating there. It's not your obligation to be tovel the Keilim. Obviously, it would be best to eat food from Keilim that have been toveled, but like we learned by commercial establishments as well, right? So I would apply that same reasoning here.
20 years used toaster. Now you come to recognize you have to have.
It's like anything else. It's like,
go back and do it now?
Yes, of course. It doesn't matter that you've used it for 20 years. In other words, if you used it for 20 years, you didn't know you had to do tefillah. Now you know you have to do tefillah. You do tefillah.
If I put them in the mikveh, I can read it.
I'm not guaranteeing anything. But there are people who say that it will not damage the toaster. Okay, everyone. Thank you very much. Wonderful.